My mother stood at the head of the dinner table, pointed her finger directly at me, and said, "You are the most selfish person in this family." Every single person at that table went quiet. My aunts, my cousins, my brother, none of them said a word. They all just looked at me, waiting to see if I would cry or apologize. I did neither. I looked at my mother very calmly, set my fork down, and said, "Okay, you'll notice when the lights go out." She laughed. She actually laughed. She thought I was being dramatic. She had no idea that 48 hours earlier I had already made the call that would change everything. She had no idea that every single bill attached to that house, the electricity, the water, the internet, the mortgage top-up, the grocery deliveries, the insurance, had my name and only my name on them. She had no idea that I had spent that whole week quietly removing my name from nothing and quietly removing myself from everything. She thought I was her ATM with feelings. She was about to find out I was something else entirely. Before we go any further, I need you to sit with something. Amelia did not scream, she did not throw anything, she did not make a scene, she simply stopped. And I want you to think about what that costs a person to give everything, to be called selfish for it, and to choose quiet over chaos. If you have ever been the one who held everything together while being treated like you were the problem, stay right here. Drop a comment and tell me, is it selfish to stop giving to people who never even noticed you were giving? Because I need to know I am not alone in thinking that some betrayals only stop when you finally, completely, stop being available for them. My name is Amelia, and for 7 years I was the financial spine of a family that never once called me that. They called me the responsible one, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it was just a polite way of saying they expected more from me and appreciated less. They called me the strong one, which really meant they had already decided I would handle whatever they chose not to. And sometimes, when I pushed back even a little, when I asked for basic consideration or reminded someone of a boundary I had already set 3 times, they called me selfish. That was the word they kept in their pocket, ready to pull out the moment I showed any sign of protecting myself. I want you to understand something about how this started, because it did not start with a screaming fight or a dramatic confrontation. It started the way most long betrayals start, slowly, quietly, with love, real love. I loved my family with everything I had. I am not someone who does things halfway. When my father passed away 8 years ago, I was 26 years old, the oldest of 3 children, and the only one already earning a real income. My brother Derek was 22 and still in school. My younger sister Priya was 19 and had barely started a part-time job. My mother Ruth was 54 and had spent most of her adult life managing the home while my father worked. She had some skills, but she had not been in the workforce in over 15 years. My father left behind a modest life insurance policy, a house with a small remaining mortgage, and not much else. When the reality of the finances hit, I stepped in. Of course I did, that is who I am. I told my mother not to worry about the mortgage that month. I told Derek I would cover his last semester of tuition so he could finish without interruption. I helped Priya pay for a certification course she wanted so she could find better work. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself this was what families do. I told myself that as things stabilized, the load would shift and we would find a new balance together. 7 years later, I was still the only one carrying the load, and nothing had shifted except my bank balance and the depth of the bags under my eyes. Here is what those 7 years looked like in numbers, because I think numbers are important. They do not lie the way people do. I paid or subsidized the mortgage on my mother's house for 61 of the 84 months following my father's death. I covered the electricity bill without exception. I covered the water. I covered the internet. When the roof needed repair in year 3, I paid for it. When the washing machine broke in year 5, I replaced it. I bought the groceries for major family dinners. I sent money for school supplies when Priya had children of her own. I quietly paid my brother Derek's car insurance for 2 years after he lost his job, because he asked me not to tell anyone and I respected that. I transferred money at 11 o'clock at night when my mother called in a panic because a bill had come in that she had forgotten about. I did all of this while paying my own rent in a city 40 minutes away, managing my own bills, and building a career that required long hours and sustained focus. That's I was not keeping score, that was never the intention. I want to be clear about that because I know how this sounds from the outside. I was not holding a ledger over their heads. I genuinely believed we were a team, and I genuinely believed that the financial imbalance was a circumstance, not a choice. I believed they were grateful even when they did not say it. I gave them the benefit of every doubt because I loved them, and because grief had touched all of us, and I did not want money to become a weapon inside a family that was already hurting. But somewhere in year 4, I started noticing things. Small things at first, things that were easy to explain away. My mother mentioned casually that she had been talking to her sister about a holiday trip. She was asking whether the timing worked. She did not ask me. She did not mention whether she had money for it or how she planned to afford it. She just mentioned it the way someone mentions something they have already budgeted for, but she had not budgeted for it. I know this because 3 weeks later, the mortgage top-up was short and I got the call I always got, the one that started with, "Amelia, I hate to bother you, but..." She went on the trip. I covered the shortfall. Nobody connected those two things out loud. A few months after that, Derek bought himself a new gaming setup, not a cheap one. I saw it on his social media, a whole new desk, a new monitor, a new chair. I did not say anything, but I remembered that 6 weeks before that, he had asked me for money for a car repair and I had sent it, no questions asked. I told myself it was possible he had saved separately. It was possible. I chose to believe it. In year 5, Priya got into a conflict with her landlord and needed first and last month's rent for a new place immediately, or she would have to move her children into my mother's already crowded house. I sent the money within 24 hours. Priya thanked me. Then 2 weeks later, I saw a photo on her social media of a girl's night out at a restaurant that I knew was not cheap. I felt something shift in my chest when I saw it, not anger exactly, more like a slow, quiet sadness. Like realizing something you should have realized much sooner. But I still said nothing, because I kept telling myself I was the strong one. I kept telling myself that pointing this out would make me look petty. I kept telling myself that family does not calculate. I kept telling myself a lot of things that were true in a perfect world and just excuses in the actual one. The moment that cracked the shell open, the moment I could no longer explain things away, happened on a regular Thursday evening in March. I had just finished a brutal stretch at work, 3 weeks of back-to-back deadlines, late nights, skipped lunches. I was depleted in a way that went bone deep. I had been quiet on the family group chat because I simply had nothing left to give conversationally. I had not sent money to anyone that month, not because I refused, but because no one had asked and I had not offered. It was the first month in over a year where I had not voluntarily sent something to someone. Then the group chat exploded. My mother sent a message that said she was struggling with the electricity bill and the internet bill and could anyone help. Derek replied within minutes saying he was tight that month. Priya said the same. Then my aunt, my mother's sister, the one she went on the holiday with, sent a private message directly to me, not to the group, to me specifically. It said, "Emilia, your mother needs help. You know you're the only one who can really help her. Don't be difficult about this." Don't be difficult. I had not said a single word. I had not replied to the group chat. I had not refused anything. I had simply been quiet for 3 weeks while I recovered from a work period that had genuinely worn me down, and I was being told privately not to be difficult. I stared at that message for a long time. I felt something inside me go very still. I paid the bills, of course I did. I was not going to let my mother sit in a dark house, but I paid them with a feeling I had never quite felt before, the feeling that my giving was not seen as giving at all. It was seen as a function, a reliable function that was only noticed when it malfunctioned. After that Thursday, I started paying attention differently. I stopped explaining away the things I noticed. I started writing them down instead, not because I planned to present them as evidence or because I wanted ammunition. I started writing them down because I needed to know if what I was feeling was real. I needed to know if I was being fair to myself. Because the alternative, that I was imagining a dynamic that did not exist, that I was being paranoid, that I was being selfish, had been suggested to me so many times by the very people benefiting from my doubt that I had started to wonder if they were right. They were not right. Within 2 months of paying attention with clear eyes, I had documented the following. My mother had made 3 separate purchases for herself: clothing, a new piece of furniture, and a contribution to a cousin's wedding gift in the same months that she had called me for bill help. Not desperate months. Months where there was money, just not money being allocated toward what I was being asked to fund. Derek had taken a weekend trip with his friends the same month he told me he was too tight to help with anything at home. Priya had signed up for an online subscription service and bought herself a new phone on an installment plan while telling my mother she had nothing to spare. None of these things were crimes. People spend their money, people make choices, but the pattern was undeniable. The family finances only became an emergency when I was the one being called. There was always money for what they individually wanted. There was never money for what they collectively owed, and the gap between those two things was always filled by me because I was the responsible one, the strong one, because not filling it made me difficult, because filling it apparently made me nothing at all. I want to tell you about the dinner because you need to understand what it felt like before I tell you what I decided. It was a family gathering in late autumn, my mother's birthday. I had organized it as I always did. I had paid for the catering as I always did. I had driven 40 minutes each way to set things up early as I always did. I was tired. I had been tired for 7 years and nobody seemed to notice or care. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, a conversation started about family finances. It was not directed at me specifically. It was a general conversation about how hard things had been and how the cost of living had gone up. My aunt made a comment about how families needed to stick together. My mother agreed. And then, without any preamble, without any specific provocation from me, my mother looked across the table and said, "Emilia, honestly, sometimes I feel like you only care about yourself." The table went quiet. I looked at her. She had that expression she sometimes got, a mixture of old frustration and performance, like she was saying something she had been holding back and was also a little proud of herself for finally saying it. My aunt nodded slightly. Derek looked at his plate, Priya looked at her phone. My mother continued, "You've been so distant, you haven't been present, this family needs more from you and lately you give us nothing." I had paid for the dinner she was eating, I had driven the plates she was eating off, I had organized the birthday she was celebrating, and she was telling me I gave nothing. This was the moment, the one I described at the beginning. I set my fork down, I did not raise my voice, I did not let my face break. I said very calmly, "Okay, you'll notice when the lights go out." She laughed, my aunt smiled, Derek finally looked up confused, Priya still had her eyes on her phone. I drove home that night and I made a list, not an angry list, a practical one. I listed every financial commitment I had to that household, every bill, every subscription, every standing contribution, and next to each one I wrote a date, the date by which I would quietly, legally, completely remove myself from it. I want to be clear about the method because this is where some people might expect me to have done something explosive or dramatic. I did not, I made no threats, I sent no angry messages, I did not call a family meeting and deliver a speech. I simply began the process of extracting my financial presence from a household that had decided I was selfish for having one. I started with the smallest things first so that no single change would trigger alarm. The grocery delivery account was in my name, I canceled the subscription and did not renew it. The internet account was in my name, I called the provider and gave 30 days notice. The electricity direct debit came from my bank account, I removed it. The small monthly insurance policy I had been paying on behalf of the house contents, I canceled that too. The mortgage top-up arrangement I had been quietly funding through a standing order, I removed the standing order. None of this was done overnight. It took 6 weeks. 6 quiet, methodical weeks during which I also did the following. I opened a dedicated savings account entirely in my own name that my family had no knowledge of. I spoke to a financial advisor about restructuring my own finances now that I was removing several $1,000s a year in family contributions. I began looking at apartments closer to my workplace because I realized that even my living situation had been partially organized around being available to my family. I told no one, I smiled at the family group chat, I sent birthday messages, I kept the surface complet. Telecom. The lights went out on a Wednesday. Not literally, not all at once, but that was the day my mother called me and her voice had a different quality in it, not the soft panic of the usual bill calls, something more genuinely confused. She said the electricity company had told her the account was not active in my name anymore. She said the internet had gone down and when Derek called the provider, they told him the account had been canceled. She asked if there had been some kind of mistake. No mistake, I said, I gave notice about a month ago. There was a silence on the line that I had never heard from my mother before. It was not anger yet. It was the silence of someone whose assumptions have just encountered reality for the first time. Why would you do that? She asked. Because I am apparently selfish, I said, and selfish people stop paying other people's bills. She started to say something and I told her gently that I had to go, that I had a work call, which was true. I hung up. The next 4 hours were something I will not forget for the rest of my life. The family group chat went from 0 to 47 messages in under 3 hours. My mother explaining the situation, Derek expressing disbelief, Priya saying this was not right, my aunt who did not live in that house but had strong opinions about it declaring that this was not how family works. 3 cousins I barely spoke to suddenly had advice. My mother's neighbor, who had somehow been added to the group chat years ago and never removed, sent a prayer emoji. Nobody called me to ask how I was. Nobody sent a private message asking if I was okay or if something had happened to me. The 47 messages were about the bills, the inconvenience, the shock, and what I needed to do to fix it. Not a single one was about me as a person. That told me everything I needed to know about the story I had been telling myself for 7 years. I did not reply to the group chat that day. I let it run. I read every message carefully, not to feel hurt by it, but because I had started to understand that evidence mattered, that the pattern I had documented privately was now playing out publicly, and that was important. My mother called 3 more times that evening. I let the calls go to voicemail, not to be cruel, because I had nothing to say yet that would be useful, and because I knew that if I answered, the conversation would go in circles and end with me apologizing for something I had not done wrong. The voicemails she left were a study in escalation. The first one was confused and a little wounded. She asked me to call her back and said she did not understand what was happening. The second one had more edge in it. She said she hoped I realized what this looked like and that it was very unlike me. The third one, and this is the one I saved, the one I still have, started with a long pause and then she said in a voice that was quiet and almost cold, "I just want you to know, Amelia, that I am very disappointed in you. Your father would be too." I listened to that third voicemail twice, and then I did something I had never done before in relation to my family. I opened my notes app, the one where I had been keeping my private record of the financial pattern, and I added an entry. I wrote down the date, the time, and the exact words of that voicemail, not because I was going to use it against her, but because I needed to protect myself from the version of this story that would eventually be told about me by people who had benefited from my silence for 7 years and now needed to explain why their bills had not been paid. Derek called the next morning. He was calmer than I expected. Derek and I had always been closer than Priya and I were, and I think some part of him deep down had always known this day was coming even if he had not wanted to think about it. He asked if we could talk, properly talk, not on the group chat. I said yes. He came to my apartment that evening. He sat across from me at my kitchen table and he looked genuinely uncomfortable, not defensive. Uncomfortable, which is different. He asked me what had happened. I told him, not emotionally, not dramatically. I opened my notes and I walked him through 2 years of documented transactions, patterns, and moments. The holiday and the mortgage shortfall, his gaming setup and the car repair money, Priya's girls' night and the deposit I had covered. The month I was silent for 3 weeks from exhaustion and was told privately not to be difficult. The birthday dinner I had paid for and organized while being told I gave nothing. Derek sat quietly through all of it. When I finished, he was silent for a moment and then he said, I didn't realize how much of it there was. I know, I said, because I never made you look at it. He asked what I was going to do. I told him I was not going to fund the household anymore. I told him I was not cutting off personal relatio. Enships, I was not abandoning anyone as a person. But the financial arrangement that had never been agreed to, never discussed, never appreciated, and never balanced, that was over. I told him I was willing to help him or Priya individually in a genuine emergency, and only if it was asked for honestly and directly, not as a pressure campaign run through our mother or our aunt. He nodded slowly, he did not try to argue, and then he said something that surprised me. He said, I think I owe you an apology. I looked at him. He said, I took the car insurance for 2 years and never said thank you, not once. I thought about it a few times and then I just didn't, and I should have. It was not a grand gesture, it was quiet, but it cracked something open in me that had been sealed shut for a long time. I did not cry then. I cried later alone after he left, because it was the first time in 7 years that someone in my family had acknowledged out loud that I had given something real and that their silence had cost me something real. Derek and I made a private agreement that evening. He would start contributing to the household. Not everything, he was not in a position to cover what I had been covering, and I did not expect him to, but something. A real, regular, agreed contribution. He would talk to Priya and try to get her to do the same. He would not tell our mother that I had walked him through the financial records because neither of us thought that conversation would go well yet. And he would stop using the family group chat as a pressure mechanism, which meant he needed to talk to our aunt. That last part, the aunt, was going to be its own event. I knew it, Derek knew it. My aunt's name is Claudette, and she is a woman who believes very strongly in family loyalty, provided the loyalty is always flowing toward the people she has decided matter most. She had been my mother's closest ally since before I was born. She had been present at every major family event and at several arguments that were none of her business. She was the one who had sent me the private message telling me not to be difficult. And she was, it turned out, the one who had been talking to my mother in the days before the birthday dinner, which I found out later from Derek, who had overheard a phone call. The comment my mother made at the dinner, the one about me being selfish, the one delivered in front of the whole family, had been something Claudette had encouraged her to say. Claudette had told my mother that she needed to set Amelia straight before Amelia started to think she ran the family. When I found that out, I sat with it for a full day before I responded to anything. Because here is what that information meant. My mother had not made that comment spontaneously. She had been coached by her sister, who had told her I needed to be corrected, not because I had done anything wrong, but because the idea that I might have opinions or limits or a point of view about how I was treated was a threat to a system where I was useful and quiet. I was not just dealing with one person's ingratitude, I was dealing with a structure, a dynamic that had been built and maintained deliberately. The electricity got reconnected in my mother's house. She and Derek worked it out. He helped her set up the account in her name. The internet took a few more days. She called me twice during that period and I answered both times. I was warm, I was not cold or punishing, but I was different and I think she could feel it even if she could not name it yet. When she mentioned the bills, I said simply that I trusted she and Derek would sort it out. When she paused and waited for me to offer something, I said nothing. And when she finally said, I hope you know this has been very stressful, I said, I imagine it has been. That kind of stress is new for you. She did not love that sentence, but she did not argue with it either. 3 weeks after the bills changed over, the first real confrontation came, not from my mother, from Claudette. She called me on a Sunday morning when I was having a quiet cup of coffee in my apartment. I answered because I had decided by then that I was not going to avoid conversations. I was going to have them differently. Claudette started by saying she was calling because she was worried. She said the family was in a lot of distress and she wanted to understand what was going on with me. She kept her voice at the concerned register, the one she used when she wanted to appear to be helping while actually gathering information and applying pressure. I let her talk. She went on for a few minutes about how family needs unity, about how my mother was getting older, about how Derek and Priya had their own challenges, about how I was the one with the most capacity and the most ability to lead by example. She was building towards something. I could hear the architecture of it even as she was laying the bricks. When she finally paused, I said, Claudette, I have a question for you. Before the birthday dinner, did you talk to my mother about what she should say to me? A short silence, then I talk to your mother all the time, we're sisters. That's not what I asked, I said. Another silence, longer this time. I may have encouraged her to express how she was feeling. You encouraged her to call me selfish in front of the whole family at a dinner I had organized and paid for. I encouraged her to speak her truth. Her truth, I said, was assembled with your help and delivered at a time and place that would cause me the maximum amount of public embarrassment. And then you sent me a private message the same night telling me not to be difficult. She started to respond and I kept going, still calm, still measured. I am not difficult, I said. I have been the opposite of difficult for 7 years. I have been so easy that nobody in this family even noticed what I was doing until I stopped doing it. That is not a compliment. That is not me being strong. That is me being taken for granted to such a degree that my absence was more noticeable than my presence ever was. I could hear Claudette recalibrating on the other end. She shifted from concern to firm. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was making this into something bigger than it was. She said that if I truly felt taken for granted, the adult thing to do was to have a conversation, not to cut off the electricity like a child. I gave 30 days notice to a provider, I said. I made a legal and personal financial decision about an account in my name. That is not cutting off electricity like a child. That is a grown woman choosing how to use her own money. She said, your mother is not well, Amelia, did you know that? I felt the temperature in my body drop slightly. What does that mean? Claudette said my mother had been to the doctor recently and had some things to discuss. She was not specific. She said she thought I should know that before I made any more decisions. Now I want to talk about what that move was because it is important to name it clearly. What Claudette did in that moment was introduce the possibility of my mother's health as a reason for me to feel guilty enough to reverse my decisions. She did not tell me anything specific. She did not say my mother had a diagnosis or a serious condition. She planted a seed of fear and guilt and then left it there unwatered to grow in whatever direction my anxiety chose. It was a manipulation. I knew it was a manipulation even as my heart rate climbed, because that is how it works. Even when you can see the move, it still lands. I took a breath. I said, if my mother has a health concern, I hope she will tell me directly. I am her daughter and I love her. That has not changed. But my love for her does not mean I owe her my financial life without acknowledgement, appreciation, or agreement. If she needs me, she knows how to reach me. And when she does, I will show up the way I always have. But what I will not do is allow health information to be used as a lever to pull me back into a financial arrangement that I never signed up for, and that was never fair. Claudette said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, I don't think I've ever heard you talk like this. I know, I said, I've been practicing. We ended the call shortly after. I sat in my kitchen and I felt shaky, not from fear, but from the physical effort of staying calm through something that wanted very much to make me panic. I called a friend, someone outside the family entirely, and I told her about the call. She listened and then she said, did your mom actually tell you anything directly about her health, or did Claudette just say there were things to discuss? I said Claudette had been vague. My friend said, then wait for your mom to tell you herself. Don't let someone else's summary of someone else's health become the reason you undo 6 weeks of protecting yourself. That was the right advice. I held it. My mother called me 4 days later. We had a long conversation, the longest real one we had shared in years. She did not bring up her health immediately. She started by telling me she had been thinking. She said she did not like how things had been between us. She said the birthday dinner comment had been wrong and that she should not have said it the way she did. It was the closest thing to an apology I had heard from her in a very long time, and I received it without minimizing it and without overselling it. I thanked her for saying it. Then she told me about the doctor. She had been having some issues with her blood pressure and her heart rhythm, nothing immediately catastrophic but serious enough to require monitoring and medication. She had been scared. She had not told anyone because she did not want to worry the family, but she had been scared and that fear had made her shorter and anger. Ear than she meant to be with the people around her. I felt something unlock in my chest when she said that. Not guilt, grief, real, soft grief for her, because I knew my mother and I knew what it cost her to admit being scared. She was not a woman who admitted vulnerability easily. It was actually one of the things we had in common. I told her I was sorry she had been carrying that alone. I told her I loved her. I told her I wanted to know about her health and be involved in her care in whatever way was helpful to her. I told her also that the financial conversation was a separate one that we still needed to have, and that loving her and being worried about her health did not mean I was able to go back to the arrangement we had before, because that arrangement had been slowly taking something from me that I needed back. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, I didn't think about it as an arrangement. I just thought of it as you helping. I know, I said, but help is something you offer. It's not something you're expected to deliver silently on demand while being called selfish. She said, is that what it felt like? I said, yes. She said, I'm sorry, Amelia. I will not pretend that was the end of all of it. It was not. One honest conversation does not undo 7 years of a dynamic. It does not rewire anyone's reflexes overnight. In the weeks that followed, there were still moments when my mother defaulted to the old patterns, moments when she mentioned a bill with a meaningful pause, hoping I would fill it. Moments when she said things like, it would mean so much to me if you could help with this. Moments when I could hear Claudette's coaching underneath her words. But something had shifted, and the shift was not just in how my family treated me, the shift was in how I responded. I stopped filling the pauses. When she mentioned a bill with a meaningful silence, I said, I hope Derek can help you with that one. When she said it would mean so much if I could help, I asked what other options she had explored first. I was warm, I was loving, but I was no longer available as the default answer to every financial question in a house full of adults who were all technically capable of contributing. Priya was the hardest one. Priya did not have Derek's self-awareness or his capacity for honest reflection. Priya had spent most of her adult life moving through crisis after crisis and expecting the people around her to absorb the impact. When the bills changed over and the family started having real conversations about finances, Priya's response was to double down. She called me 3 times in 1 week. Each call had a different emergency. Each emergency required money. The first call, I listened and asked questions. The second call, I listened less and asked more. The third call, I asked her directly, Priya, have you spoken to Derek about this? Have you looked at any of the resources in your area for the specific thing you're dealing with? She said she had not had time. I said that I understood she was overwhelmed and that I genuinely wished I could make it easier, but that I was not able to be the answer to every crisis anymore. I said I loved her. I said I would be happy to help her think through options. I was not going to send money to solve a problem that had other solutions she had not tried yet. She hung up on me. She did not speak to me for 3 weeks. When she finally came back, she did not come back with an apology. She came back with a softer ask, not a crisis, just a request. She wanted to know if I could help her find a better bank account with lower fees because the one she had been using was costing her a lot monthly. A real, practical, specific adult question, not a crisis, not a demand, a question. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with her, looking up options, comparing accounts, talking through the features. When we hung up, she said, thank you, just that, 2 words, but the quality of them was different from any thank you I had heard from her before. It was not the thank you of someone who expected help and received it. It was the thank you of someone who had asked for something uncertain and gotten it. That is a different gratitude entirely. I am telling you all of this in order, but I want to pause here and tell you about something that happened in the middle of all of it that I have not mentioned yet. Something that happened at work. Because the changes I was making in my personal life were also doing something unexpected to my professional one. For years, I had a pattern at work that mirrored the one I had at home. I was the reliable one, the one who took on extra, the one who never complained, never pushed back, never said she was at capacity. My colleagues liked me, my managers liked me. But I had noticed over time that liking someone and valuing their time are not the same thing. I was being trusted with more work without being paid more for it. I had been passed over for a promotion 18 months earlier in favor of a colleague who was, by every observable metric, producing less than I was, but who was louder and more visibly confident in meetings. I had accepted this at the time with my usual quiet. I told myself the next cycle would be different. I told myself to keep performing. I told myself the same things I had been telling myself at home about family, that doing the right thing would eventually be recognized. It was not being recognized, it was being assumed. In the weeks after I started protecting myself at home, I felt something change in how I showed up at work. Not aggressively, not with bitterness, but something in me had been recalibrated by the experience of finally valuing my own contribution. I booked a meeting with my manager. I came in with documentation, actual output data, project outcomes, client feedback scores, a comparison of my workload against my pay band. I did not make a speech. I laid out the numbers. I asked very directly what the path to the next level looked like for someone with my output. My manager looked at the documentation for a long moment. Then she said, honestly, Amelia, I didn't realize you had been carrying this much. Those words again, I hadn't realized. I thought about my brother saying that at my kitchen table. I thought about my mother saying she had just thought of it as me helping. I thought about all the years I had spent being legible to no one because I had made it so easy, so effortless in appearance, that no one had needed to look. My manager approved a reclassification review within 2 weeks. The outcome was a promotion and a salary adjustment that represented the largest single pay increase I had ever received. It did not undo the 18 months I had spent being overlooked, but it was real. And it was the direct result of making myself visible by making my contribution visible, by refusing to keep it as quiet as I had always kept it. I came home that evening and sat in my apartment and looked at the number in my updated employment contract, and I thought about all the years I had poured into other people's stability while my own had stayed the same. I did not feel angry. I felt something sharper and cleaner than anger. I felt resolved. I felt like I understood finally what I had been doing wrong, not morally wrong, but strategically wrong, relationally wrong, personally wrong. I had been operating on the assumption that visible goodness would eventually be rewarded by the people who benefited from it. I had been wrong. Goodness that is not visible is not goodness to the people receiving it. It is just the air, and no one thanks the air. Now I want to tell you about the moment that I consider the true climax of this story. Not a fight, not a confrontation with Claudette, not a financial record shown to anyone. The climax for me was a Sunday afternoon in my mother's kitchen, about 5 months after the dinner where she called me selfish. I had driven over for a quiet visit, just the two of us. My mother was doing better health-wise. Her blood pressure had stabilized on the medication and her mood had lifted considerably. We were making tea and she was telling me about something she had seen in the garden and she stopped mid-sentence and said, "I want to ask you something." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "Do you feel like I used you?" I held my cup and I looked at her and I thought very carefully before I answered, because this was not a moment for performance. It was not a moment for revenge or score settling. It was a moment for truth. I said, "I think you let a situation continue that was unfair to me. I think you did not do it out of malice. I think you did it because it was comfortable and because I never made it uncomfortable. I think Claudette told you things that confirmed what was easier to believe and I think you believed them. But I also think that deep down you knew." She looked at the table, she did not argue. "I don't think you used me the way someone uses a stranger," I said. "But I think you used me the way people use someone they love and trust too much to worry about because they're convinced that person will be fine no matter what. And I wasn't fine. I was paying for everyone's fineness at the expense of my own." My mother said after a long pause, "Your father used to say you were the one who would be okay no matter what." "I know," I said, "and I've spent my whole adult life proving him right. But being okay isn't the same as being happy, and it's not the same as being treated right." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was warm. I felt the familiar pull of it, the gravitational force of her love, the complicated and real and imperfect love that had shaped me. I did not pull away, but I did not collapse into it either. She said, "I'm proud of you, Amelia, not for what you've done for us, for what you're becoming." That sentence broke something open in me that I am still figuring out how to close. Because that was what I had wanted, not the money back, not an apology that covered every wrong moment, not a full accounting. I had wanted my mother to see me, to see that I was a person inside all the reliability, to see that there was something in me worth noticing that was not the monthly transfer. And she finally did. Claudette has not called me since our Sunday morning phone call. She sends messages on the group chat occasionally and I respond politely when relevant. She came to a family lunch 2 months after the confrontation and was pleasant in a careful, measured way that told me she knew she had been caught doing what she had been doing. We did not address it directly. We did not need to. The power that had come from me being unaware of her influence over my mother was gone. She was aware that I was aware. That was enough. Derek has kept his word. He contributes to the household consistently now, not a huge amount, but a real amount, a dependable amount, an amount that is his to give without drama. My mother has adjusted to a more balanced arrangement. She has had to be more careful with her spending, which has actually been good for her in ways she has acknowledged. She has started to notice, for the first time in years, what things actually cost. That awareness has made her more present and less passive about her own financial life, and I think, quietly, it has given her a dignity she did not know she was missing. Priya remains complicated. She is who she is, and I have accepted that I cannot change her patterns, only my response to them. She no longer calls me in manufactured crises. Whether that is because she has genuinely shifted or because she has learned I will not perform the expected response, I cannot be sure, probably some of both. We talk about regular things now, her children, her work. Sometimes she asks for practical help and I give it when I can. It is not a warm closeness yet, but it is honest. And honest is something I will take over warm but false any day. I got the keys to my new apartment 3 months ago. It is closer to my office. It is quieter. It has a small balcony where I drink my coffee in the morning and think about nothing important for a few minutes before the day starts. I furnished it slowly with things I actually liked without worrying about whether the money I was spending on myself was money that should go somewhere else. I bought a plant. I named it something stupid that I will not tell you. It is doing very well. My finances are different now. The money I was putting into other people's stability is going into my own. I have a savings account that is growing for the first time in years. I have a retirement account that I am contributing to at a rate that my financial advisor says will actually make a difference. I have booked one trip for myself, a solo trip to a place I have wanted to go for years that I kept postponing because the timing was never right or because something else needed the money. The timing is right now, the money is mine now. And every morning on that small balcony, I think about who I was for 7 years and who I am becoming. I think about the woman who sat at a birthday dinner she had organized and paid for and was told she gave nothing. I think about the woman who said very calmly, "You'll notice when the lights go out," and meant it in a way that no one at that table understood at the time. I think about what it cost me to stay quiet that long. And I think about what it is giving me now that I have stopped. I did not win anything dramatic. There was no courtroom scene. There was no single moment of public humiliation where the truth came out and everyone gasped and turned to me with apologies. Real life does not do that. What real life did was this: it gave me back my own opinion of myself. It gave me the ability to say without flinching that I was worth something not because of what I produced for others, but because of who I was. It gave me a brother who looked me in the eye and said he was sorry. It gave me a mother who, finally, called me something other than selfish. And it gave me a quiet evening in my own apartment, with my bills all paid, my savings growing, my name on nothing that is not mine, and the deep, still, almost disorienting peace of a woman who finally, completely, stopped giving herself away. Some people are going to hear this story and say I was too harsh. They are going to say that family is family and that I should have talked to them sooner, communicated better, set limits earlier. Maybe I am not going to argue with any of that. Maybe I should have. But I want to say this clearly. I tried softer versions of these conversations for years. I hinted, I sighed, I said it's a lot and waited for someone to ask what the lot was. Nobody asked. The softer versions did not work. What worked was consequence. Instead, real, quiet, financial, personal consequence, and I am not going to apologize for that. What I will say is this: if you are reading this or listening to this and you recognize yourself somewhere in it, not in the dramatic parts, but in the quiet parts, the parts where you talk yourself out of your own feelings, the parts where you explain away the pattern one more time, the parts where you tell yourself that needing to be appreciated is selfish, I want you to hear me say that it is not selfish. It is human. The most basic, legitimate, entirely reasonable thing a human being can want is to be seen by the people they love. You do not have to run a financial analysis. You do not have to keep a spreadsheet. You do not have to do any of the specific things I did, but you do have to stop making yourself invisible in order to keep the peace. Because the peace that requires you to disappear is not peace. It is just a quiet version of the same injustice, and you deserve better than a quiet injustice. My name is Amelia, and for 7 years I held up the lights. Now I hold up only what is mine to hold, and I have never felt lighter. If Amelia's story hit something in you, I want you to sit with this question. How long have you been the one holding the lights on for people who never once looked up to notice the glow? Drop a comment below and tell me the moment you realized you were giving more than you were receiving. Not to vent, but because your moment might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you know someone who is silently carrying a weight this heavy, share this with them. Sometimes the most important thing is just knowing you are not the only one. I'll see you in the next story.